Hi and welcome to the NBA show. My name is Morten Jensen and today we'll be discussing the Los Angeles Clippers, so stay tuned. The Clippers have flown under the radar this season. They're 38-18, they're third in the Western Conference, and they just look damn competent. They have a strong unit, a strong starting lineup, a lot of forward depth, a lot of raw talent, and it really seems like they are going to be a legitimate NBA championship contender. But for some reason, we seem to be preoccupied with Milwaukee, with the Los Angeles Lakers, with Denver, with Utah, with all these teams, and not really mentioning the Clippers much of all. I mean, we're even talking about the Suns more than the Clippers, and yes, the Suns definitely deserve a lot of attention. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but I think it's time we give some love to the Clippers because they are there. They are in the thick of things. They are a legitimate candidate, so let's see what they have. First and foremost, obviously, they have Kawhi Leonard, and I would venture this. He should be an MVP candidate, even though he isn't really being brought up as one. He's only missed 11 games this year, which is low for him considering how much he relies on load management. So for him to come in and play as many games as he's done, and also considering the fact that he's averaging 26 points, over 6 rebounds, over 5 assists, I mean, he has to be right in that conversation. It also needs to be mentioned that he plays all-world defense much as usual. He's only failed to score 20 points in a game 5 times, and he has yet to fail to reach 15 for the entire season, which means he's just been so consistent all year long. Obviously, you wouldn't expect anything else. It is Kawhi Leonard after all, but I think it's time we start giving him the respect. The team has the right record, he has the right numbers, he has the right impact. I think it's time we start to include him to a much higher degree in the MVP conversation. He is not underserving, is basically my point here. Next to Kawhi, of course, is Paul George, and look, we need to have a conversation here, because I think it's time to end that horrible, horrific pandemic P moniker that people kind of put on him. That was just ridiculous. Paul George is a hell of a player. We're looking at a guy who right now is averaging over 23 points per game, as well as 6 rebounds, 5+ assists. He's hitting over 44% from downtown on almost 7.5 nightly attempts. I mean, that is in that same category as a healthy Klay Thompson, as a healthy Stephen Curry. I mean, he could legitimately be a third Splash Bro. I mean, those numbers are just incredible. He has become one of the most pure shooters in the NBA, and for some reason, he's just flying under the radar, which I guess is a theme for this team. But look, the pandemic P handle, it needs to be deleted. It needs to be forgotten. We need to appreciate Paul George for what he is doing. Also, something that's worth noting is the fact that, much like Kawhi Leonard, he's playing defense and he's doing that at a high level. That duo has to be one of the most devastating two-way forces in the entire NBA. So why aren't we talking more about them again? Please remind me. Something else about Paul George that I just need to get in there before we move on. He is perfectly capable of stepping up when Kawhi is out. For example, last night, the Los Angeles Clippers played against the Indiana Pacers. Kawhi was out. Paul George responded with a 36-point performance, 4 of 7 from downtown, 8 rebounds. He was phenomenal. He was just the primary guy on that team, and that's the thing that he can do. A lot of people look at Paul George and going, is he a second or third guy? No, he could easily be the number 1 guy. We almost seem to be forgetting that this was a dude who was averaging 28 points in Oklahoma City. And yes, you could argue that Russell Westbrook was the number 1 guy, but not really, right? He was just this force of nature, but Paul George was the calculated guy. He was the one who took the right shots. He was the guy you really trusted in the clutch time. He's that guy. He can step into a number 1 role when that is needed of him, and when he does, he performs at a very high level. I think it's worth remembering. I think it's worth just making this little mental note that he is that type of player. My point here is, let's not sleep on Paul George anymore, and let's delete the pandemic P handle because it is frankly insulting. So as a team, going into last night's game against the Pacers, the Los Angeles Clippers had the best offense in the NBA, the very best offensive rating, and they were a top 10 defensive team as well. This is a team that's just highly efficient, plays both ends of the court, and they're also second in the NBA in both effective field goal percentage and true shooting percentage. But where it gets really interesting, and where I think that they have a chance to do some damage in the playoffs, is when you look at their 3-point field goal percentage. Also ranks number 1 in the league at 42%, and then at the free throw percentage, also leading the league at 84%. Those are ridiculous numbers when you look at it from a team-wide concept. Like, yes, your best shooter on a team would probably rank up those percentages, but as a team, as an entire team, to produce that type of efficiency, mind-blowingly good. That is something that is going to carry them forward in the playoffs. It's going to squeeze out wins, because that means you just can't foul them. You can't really do a whole lot because they're so efficient. They are just going somehow, some way to put points on that board and do so efficiently. Also helping in the efficiency department is their lack of turnovers. They rank in the top 5 in the NBA in protecting the basketball. And a lot of people seem to be forgetting that area of the game when they're discussing efficiency. I think those are pretty tied together. Like, just imagine this. You could be a high efficiency player who hits 50% of your threes and 90% of your free throws or whatever, but if you turn the ball over at an insanely high degree, that is going to lessen your overall efficiency, is my point of view. For the Clippers to be that efficient from the field and also protecting the basketball to the extent that they do, those are parameters that you're looking at going, this could be just huge for them when they are going to be meeting a higher level of competition. So for right now, I think we need to have that conversation. We need to be able to look at how things tie together. Efficiency, both from a shooting perspective and protecting the basketball, they are very much intertwined. And I think it's time we as an NBA community come together and also realize turnovers play a bigger part in efficiency than we might want to admit. Now, of course, questions do remain about the quality of their depth, as well as them not having a quote-unquote third guy. Now, that's one of those tricky situations, right? Because we're still kind of stuck in our mindset of you need a big 3, which I don't necessarily think is true anymore. It seems like the league has pivoted more to a 2-star system, so looking at it through that spectrum, it's not really that important. But I do acknowledge there is a severe drop-off after Kawhi and Paul George next to, well, whoever is number 3 on that list. And that might be part of the issue. We don't really know who that guy is, but is it a problem when you look at it from a broader strokes perspective? Is it really a problem that you have multiple candidates who can step up on any given night and almost by committee be that third guy, depending on matchup, depending on the situation? Could it actually be a luxury that there isn't really a set third guy and that could change on a nightly basis? One night it might be Luke Kennard going off with his pick and roll schemes and his outside shooting. Another night it might be Marcus Morris going off for 35. You know, it could even be Ivica Zubac, it could be Serge Ibaka. Hell, it could be Terrence Mann. I mean, we're looking at these guys who have a lot of scoring ability, a lot of playmaking ability. Nicholas Batum is another one. He's more of a two-way guy, more of a complementary player. But if he hits it the right way on any given night, he could go off for 25. The fact that they have all these players at their disposal who can put up these numbers, I think is such a luxury when you look at the overall picture. Now, one thing that is true is that they don't really have a whole lot of playmaking from the guard spots. Reggie Jackson is a scorer more so than he is a facilitator. They don't really have that pass-first point guard. Patrick Beverley is a defender and more of a spot-up three-point shooter. He's not someone who's going to get in on the action and get you 15 assists. That's just not how he rolls as a basketball player. Now, to be fair though, The ball does move through Kawhi and Paul George, and both of them are averaging over 5 assists per game, so it might not be that crucial of an element, but I do think it is important to have someone who's able to just play make from the guard spot, especially as you move into the playoffs. And look, they gave up a haul at the trade deadline for Rajon Rondo. I think they drastically overpaid on that endeavor. They gave up Lou Williams, they gave up draft picks. I don't think Rondo is worth that, but maybe to the Clippers specifically, he just fills a need in such a capacity that they felt it was worth the gamble. And look, the early returns, to be fair, have been pretty decent. He has been an all-around guy. He's been looking more engaged. That matters for Rondo. He's really one of those guys who plays best when he's in the right mood. And, you know, I really have a strong distaste for players who play better when they're somewhat engaged. In that sense, I think you need to find your own motivation. Rondo's not one of those guys, but maybe for him, playing on a championship contender just changes that entire outlook. Who knows? But right now, you have to hope that Rondo delivers for the rest of this regular season and also in the playoffs, because he is, after all, a guy who can get the offense moving. He is a guy who will pass the basketball. He is a guy who can set up guys to a certain extent. So maybe he's the answer, but yeah, I would definitely like to see them get just a little bit more production out of their guards. Maybe that could be one of the things they'll be looking at in the summer in free agency. Or maybe the solution is actually Luke Kennard, who has been grotesquely underused in this system. He's been struggling a little bit finding his role. I have a theory that he's going to be much better in year 2 as a Clipper than he was here in year 1 as a Clipper. So we'll see what the future holds. But right now, they need to be focusing on this season. We can't really look a season ahead. Kawhi obviously is going to opt out of his contract. He'll be a free agent. Now I think he'll return, but why take the chance? This is a win or bust season if you're the Clippers. There's just no two ways about it. It's also important, in my opinion, to give Serge Ibaka more minutes when he returns from his current back injury. On the season, he's averaging just over 23 minutes per game, and for someone like him with this talent set that he's got, you need to amp up the minutes. This is a guy who plays at a vital spot, the 4-5 position. He's a floor spacer. He's a two-way guy. He plays very, very solid foundational defense. He's a guy who can block shots. He's a guy who can rebound. He also moves the ball. I mean, if he was being given around 30 minutes per game, I think we would have our answer just in regards to who would be the third best player on that team. Ibaka certainly has the skills. He has the talent. He has the competitive fire. I am a little bit surprised to see how few minutes he's getting. I think it's because Ty Lue has prioritized playing Marcus Morris, Kawhi, and Paul George a lot together, because those are just like 3 competent wings, and in today's league, wings are virtually everything. That said, Ibaka gives you so many more things as well, so I think it's crucial when he gets back, and pending health, of course. If his back injury is still lingering when he returns, keep it at the status quo, don't extend his minutes. That would be totally fair. But overall, if he's healthy, if he's playable, and if the medical staff looks at him going, yeah, you can extend his minutes, I think you need to do so. He's just too crucial of an NBA player not to have on the court. Keep in mind, this is a guy who used to lead the league in blocks. And you might wonder, well, is that really still the case? It's not. He has aged, but he sacrificed shot blocking to play a better brand of defense, more positional defense, instead of chasing blocks. And you know what? Opposing players know it. Serge Ibaka is still one of the most influential big man defenders in the NBA. So for him to have a solid presence out there for maybe an extended period of time is going to change that defense. It's going to change how offenses attack them. It's going to change so many things. I would love to see him get more minutes. Somewhat relatedly, it's also time to give Zubac a bigger chance. I know that he has a lot of followers in Clipperland, and you know what? Despite me not being in Clipperland, I'm one of them. I think this guy is grotesquely underutilized. I think People aren't really realizing just how big of a contributor he can be. Maybe it's the whole let's move off of the center ideology in the NBA, which yes, I get to a certain point, but he's a very good defender near the basket. He's an exceptional rebounder. He's an efficient scorer around the rim. He can even pop the mid-range J. I wouldn't even be shocked in a couple of years from now he starts hitting threes. This is a guy who needs more minutes. He's just productive. He's rock solid. He's got a big frame. He's going to change your defense, much like Ibaka. I do think there are opportunities here when you can go with the too big setup, simply because Ibaka spaces the floor on the other end. Of course, that shouldn't be their staple. The staple should be all their wings. That I'm not saying otherwise, but I do think it's worth testing that out just here and there, even in small minutes. Those two guys are just insanely productive, and it makes sense to give them some more chances and more opportunities. Also, just to help Kawhi and Paul George not have as much of a minutes burden or shot burden for that matter. So yeah, there are a lot of things going on here in Clipperland. Ultimately, I'm super optimistic of where they are. I think there are legitimate championship contenders. So let's see what the future holds. Thank you for watching. Next week, I'm doing a big Q&A on this channel. So ask your questions in the comments below and I'll get to them next week.